Activist, progressive political strategist, and movement builder Ginna Green is here today. As a progressive Black Jewish woman, she's here to discuss the modern racism toward the Jewish and Black communities and what allies can do to help abolish this type of discrimination in the future. Nothing's off the table, and that's how we all become more socially conscious. This is Advocate Now. Ginna, it's so wonderful to have you with us today.
Thanks for having me.
Well, unfortunately, in recent months, we've seen yet another attempt at division with the anti-Semitic narrative being pushed by the media. Being a Jewish woman of color, what can you tell us about the response to this by both the Jewish and Black communities?
Well, I can tell you that it's been disappointing in many cases from both the Black and Jewish communities. What we know about anti-Semitism is that it is one of many oppressions that are part of the machinery of division and fear. And it is meant to divide us from each other, divide communities who actually have more in common than we don't have in common. And I think it's been hard to see so many of the comments that we've seen coming from Black folks with also not a recollection and an understanding of how Black folks might be in relationship with Jewish communities over time. I think it's really hard for folks to understand and sit in the same places as a Jewish person or a Black person. And I think that once we can sort of understand how our futures are intertwined and how our oppressions are intertwined too, that we can actually move forward in a better way.
So much of it, I think, has to do with understanding. So for those looking to understand, to become more socially aware and conscious, what are some hurdles Jewish women, women of color, or Jewish women of color may have had to endure in everyday modern life?
It's, Kimberly Crenshaw, famed law professor who brought intersectionality to our common vocabulary many years ago. I think it is so important to recognize in this moment, Black women, Black Jewish women of color, we are experiencing so many of these intersecting oppressions at the same time. And I think that, Malcolm X said that the most hated woman and most hated person in America was a Black woman. And you can imagine what it must be like for Black Jewish women navigating Jewish communities, Jewish spaces where we are the minority. And sometimes it's hard for us to navigate Black spaces where religiously we're a minority. I know that for me, there are definitely places that I go where I'm like, okay, I'm actually not sure if I can articulate my Jewishness here, if I can express it here, not necessarily because I'm afraid of anti-Semitism, but just because I'm afraid of discomfort. And I don't want to put people in a position that might push them at a point in time when they're not ready, or nor do I want to be pushed at a certain time when I'm not ready. So these are things that we are navigating and mindful of every minute of every day and every space that we walk through.
How would you say your experience as a progressive Black woman and a Jewish woman has shaped your opinions around discrimination? And what have you learned about yourself and the world in the process?
It's interesting. I think more than being a Black Jewish woman, I think being a Black Jewish mother has shaped and colored how I see discrimination. I've got 4 kids from college to 2nd grade, 2 boys, 2 girls. And my boys walk out into the world with my brown skin, and they also are wearing kippot on their heads and ritual fringes, tzitzit, on their bodies. So they are walking out into the world visibly, unapologetically, both Black and Jewish. And for a long time, I worried most about their Blackness. I still worry most about their Blackness, but I also know that they now have, in this era where we are seeing anti-Semitism being used and weaponized against our communities, they've also got a double target on their back right now. And so for me, that has sort of put me in a position of redoubling these efforts of recognizing the connections between anti-Black racism and anti-Semitism, and recognizing that we can't fight one without fighting the other.
From your experience, how has the Black and Jewish communities become more progressive in some ways?
It's interesting. If you look at the data, Black women are the most solidly progressive / big D Democratic voters you can imagine. And right behind them is the Jewish community. And so I'm a part of two of the most solidly, dependably progressive blocs of voters in the country. And yet we are not immune to some of the right-leaning trends that we have seen, not just in the United States, but across the world. And so I think it is really important at this moment where we're seeing right-wing attitudes take shape and flourish in the Jewish community, particularly in Orthodox Jewish communities. And we're also seeing the same thing happen in Black and Latino communities too, more resonance with the right-wing message. And so I think that it's important for us to really recognize that we're at a crucial moment in our politics and our society that is going to require all bodies, all hands, all of our parts on deck to sort of beat back what we're seeing happening.
In your opinion, how do we continue to move the needle forward for equality for these marginalized communities?
Together. It's really the only way forward. And I know it sounds simple and I know it sounds easy, but it really is important to recognize that anti-Black racism, anti-Semitism, misogyny, transphobia, Islamophobia, all of these are designed to divide the very people who should be united in building the future that we all want to create and build.
What issues would you say should be on the forefront when trying to push for equality for the Jewish community?
It's important for us to recognize that the Jewish community in the United States is absolutely in a particular position to use all of our resources, all of our talents, and all of our assets at our disposal to bring forth the equality for all other people as well. We must not have a fight that's just against anti-Semitism, because the fight against anti-Semitism is the fight against anti-Black racism. The fight against anti-Semitism is the fight against Islamophobia. The fight against anti-Semitism is the fight for LGBT equality. I really believe that fighting anti-Semitism means raising the voices and amplifying the fights of all the communities that we should stand in solidarity with.
You know, of course, the burden in fighting for equality shouldn't fall on the oppressed. So how can allies help combat anti-Semitism and racism right now?
One of the things I see so much, and I'm from the South where there aren't that many Jewish folks and that many large Jewish communities, so many of us actually don't have Jewish friends. And there are a lot of folks, a lot of white folks who don't have any Black friends. I mean, I really do believe that so much of this is interpersonal, and it does start with the individual and it does start with the one person. And I think we also have to be willing to see the systemic nature of anti-Semitism, the systemic nature of anti-Black racism, and how these show up. So how can our communities, our organizations, our advocates, our money, our resources, how can we deploy these to empower other communities to fight for their own equality too? How can we share our wealth and resources to make a bigger pie and not just fight over our slices of it?
Ginna, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'm Sonia Baghdady. Thanks for watching and advocating. For more stories and content like this, visit advocate.com and advocatechannel.com.